The minority firstly wishes to commence by joining with the other members of this House in paying tribute to a former member of this Assembly in the person of Mr. Neil Wilson, who left us this week. You know, public service, especially at this level, is often a thankless job. And whenever one from among us would have contributed, without regard for how we value that contribution on whatever scale, we must be ready to always say thank you. And so we express sincerest condolences to his family. And we are praying for his family and loved ones during this difficult period. Madam Presiding Officer, I also want to thank you for this opportunity to respond to the final budget in this cycle. Yes, this is the final budget in this cycle. It seemed like just yesterday we got started, and the member for Bacolette, Mount St. George, would have presented the first budget of this cycle. But this is our final budget in this cycle. It is the 8th budget presented from the member for Bacolette, Mount St. George, and hopefully, by God's grace, this is his final budget that he will present in this House. It is no secret, Madam Presiding Officer, that the party I represent is offering me as the head of its ticket for the Tobago House of Assembly elections to come in 2021. Meanwhile, the minority leader and the political leader member for Belgarden East, Roxborough, Delaford will be transitioning into national politics down at the National Parliament. And we have not had in this House since former Chairman A.N.R. Robinson in 1986 would have opted to not lead his party in leading the THA, but rather to go to Trinidad and to pursue the fight for internal self-government and for autonomy for Tobago. Similarly, the minority leader is doing the same. And so it will be remiss of me to not commence by acknowledging the fact that not only is the minority leader being selfless, but he's also being generous. You see, many times when we think of youth leadership, people think of youth leadership in terms of tokenism, giving a youth a tush, giving a youth a chance. But for us on the opposite side, we are not about giving somebody a tush. Because you will know, Madam Presiding Officer, as a child, if a man gives you a tush on a bicycle, he could tell you how long you could ride it for, how far you could ride it, and what kind of skills you could do on the bike. In fact, if you tell your car, bust a wheelie, a car bust a wheelie with that bike, because all you have is just a tush. And so, for us on the opposite side, we would never ever conceive giving a youth a tush for a few months as a pawn just so that the road could be paved for an older leader. When we give authority and give responsibility to young people, we are giving them the full reign of authority and responsibility. That's how the opposition in this House sees youth leadership. And so it is no secret at this juncture that I intend to take the reins of my party's trusts, to take the reins of this House. And I am confident, Madam Presiding Officer, that the next time I stand here to present on the budget, I will be standing opposite from where I now sit. And I look forward with anxious anticipation to that day. But of course, everything after God. Now, the budget response today comes at a time when the world is experiencing some peculiarities. It isn't passed on us, it isn't missed by us that we are living in peculiar times. Peculiar times in that, on one hand, we have a global pandemic that makes the last global pandemic, which is HIV/AIDS, pale in comparison. Peculiar times in that we have a global economic crisis that is spurred on by global powers fighting within the oil industry, causing a glut in the market. Peculiar times because in the world we live in, Donald Trump is president and Boris Johnson is prime minister. And one can safely opine that we live in strange times. And for us on this tiny island of Tobago, we must grapple with these global crises, and we must simultaneously and creatively manage our relationship with a larger and sometimes abusive fraternal twin sister called Trinidad. In 1980, this modern and post-independent Tobago House of Assembly began as a way of rectifying some of the disparities in the relationship between the two islands. Later this year, this institution will celebrate 40 years. In the life of a man, when you're approaching 40, you're approaching midlife crisis. I pray that this institution isn't approaching midlife crisis, but that this institution is awakening to not just the realities of the world we live in, but awakening to new dreams and new vision for the island. At 40 years, there are many things that we can be grateful for and that we should be grateful for throughout the 40 years, including the 20 years run by those opposite. So there are things we ought to be grateful for. But we must bemoan the incompleteness of this governance dream that we have. If we are listening intently on the ground, Madam Presiding Officer, then we will know that there are many people in Tobago, especially our young people, who are beginning to feel as if this experiment in internal self-government has failed. And it is not our duty in this house to judge them harshly for that opinion. It is not our duty to be arrogant and to rubbish their feelings. In fact, the voter turnout in the last THA election may be indicative of how people are beginning to feel about this institution. And so it must be our duty, Madam Presiding Officer, to not just listen, but to respond accordingly to the criticisms of the public and to those who feel like this experiment in internal self-government has somehow not really fulfilled or lived up to the expectations they were given. It is our duty to convince the public that this THA is still a necessary part of their lives. And we can't convince the public by burying our heads in the sand. We can't convince the public by coming to the house and taking cheap shots at the minority council or engaging in ad hominem attacks on the minority leader. In fact, that does very little to convince the public of the usefulness of the THA. If, for anything else, it makes us or makes the situation more desperate, Madam Presiding Officer. The history of this THA is one where we can divide it in two halves. Two halves, Madam Presiding Officer. The first 20 years of the THA went to A.N.R. Robinson and the party and his followers. First 20 years. And the second 20 years would have gone to former Chief Secretary Mr. Orville London and the People's National Movement. Unbelievable as it is, Tobago has given equal decades of power to two different fractions. Unbelievable as it is, Tobago seemed to be bashful, shy about change, and has only made one political party change in 4 decades. That's the reality of the politics of Tobago. I don't know how many countries in the world are so afraid of change. But I wish to posit today that if we don't change, we won't grow. I wish to posit that if as an island, we don't invest in change and change agents, then we will never grow. And so today, as I respond to the budget, I want to do so in primarily 2 ways. First, I want to critique the budget that was presented by the member for Backlet Mount St. George. Secondly, I want to share some broad policy or plans or projects that I think the THA should be engaged in. Some of these will effectively endorse some of what has been said in this house previously. And I will frame all of this within the fact that we are actually debating the 20th budget presented by the same political party. That's the reality. And so if we are going to thump our desks and shout hooray for the things that were successful, then we must beat our chests and take responsibility for the things that failed as well. Because the truth is, in the last 20 years, neither Minority Leader Duke, nor Councillor Dr. Faith B. Israel, nor myself had the opportunity to sit in exec council. None of us made any of these decisions that costed and is costing Tobagonians daily. None of us. And so we are in this because we love Tobago. We are in this because we believe that a lot more can be done. We are in this because we believe that we can do better. We have not done our best as yet. In fact, the best is yet to come. And so, let me start by critiquing what was presented on Monday. In the budget presented on Monday, the Secretary of Finance resorted to a bizarre game of smoke and mirrors. And to me, and to many Tobagonians, this raises several troubling questions about what is going on in the mind of the man. What is he thinking about? Perhaps the secretary may be still suffering from an acute case of tabanka, and so he could not manage his emotions along with other mental requirements in a sufficient time to present a budget that was above his lackluster performance on Monday. And this is the goodly gentleman's 8th budget. So he's by no means a novice to this lectern. We are forced to ask, Madam Presiding Officer, and I want to ask boldly, if it is we are embracing a new form of house slavery, if it is that we are accepting mendicancy as the new policy and the new order of the day, I'm forced to ask if it is that we are comfortable with the same old, same old, same old, same. And I can tell you, Madam Presiding Officer, for those of us on the other side and for many Tobagonians, that's a resounding no. We're not comfortable with the same old, same old, same old, same old run of the mill that does not produce the results that we desire. The budget, as presented by the Secretary, lacked clarity in several areas, and I will explore those areas. And there is little projection in terms of output and outcomes that is required and the jobs that will be created from an estimated $4.7 billion budget. And let me give you an example. If we are budgeting for agriculture access roads, don't you think it's time that we are able to say to Tobagonians that if we build these access roads in these areas, then it will result in this amount of farms benefiting, this increase in productivity, these crops becoming more readily available? That is looking at the output, looking at the outcome. And if all we are doing is budgeting based on expenditure, but not really paying attention and researching the outcomes that we want to achieve from the budget we are presenting, then we are not presenting a good budget. And the budget doesn't provide a clear enough roadway or road map for Tobagonians to follow. Now, first, in the midst of a serious crisis like the COVID-19 pandemic, the secretary comes and he gives us a $4.71 billion budget, and it has now become sort of a tired, old, intellectually bankrupt practice that we throw out these budgets and then get about half or less than half when you look at what we get on the development or capital side of the budget in revenues to fund the budget. So we're just throwing out these figures, and there's no correlation between throwing out these figures and actually getting what we need to run this place called Tobago. And I search for reasons why the Secretary of Finance would not, after his 8th budget and his 8th experience, after the 20th budget of the PNM and the 20th experience with how the central government responds to our budget requests, I search for reasons for why he will still give us a budget of $4.71 billion. For plausible explanation, because maybe he was thinking something beyond the tabanka over the chief secretary seat. Maybe at first, the member for Bacalet Mount St. George believed the Minister of Finance, who during the supplemental budget said that Tobago will get all the support it requires. So maybe he believed that. And, you know, almost every citizen in this country would tell you that the Minister of Finance was just grandstanding. So I don't understand how he could believe that promise when during his last 8 budgets, all we have gotten for Tobago is the bare minimum as allowed for by the DRC, by the Dispute Resolution Commission. Just last year, he asked for $4.5 billion, we got 2.3. And so the pattern has been the same ad nauseum. And Tobagonians are asking, so at what point are we going to try a different strategy? At what point are we going to try something differently? And because we keep doing this, it keeps on looking as if we are begging. It keeps on looking as if we going cup in hand, bruising our knees, paying penitence, and begging and hoping and pleading that one day, the central government will wake up and just give us what we asked for. Maybe this year we will get lucky. But if we should go by what happened recently, where the government has already committed to spending $2.7 billion in its supplementary appropriations, and the THA got $105 million, that is only 3.9%. So the pattern has not really changed, even in the midst of this COVID crisis and how the country has been responding to the COVID crisis. Another plausible reason for why the secretary will give us a $4.7 billion budget could perhaps be that the secretary genuinely believes that the people of Tobago will take his bloated proposals as convincing election strategy. And I feel that is the reason why we have a $4.7 billion budget, in the hopes that maybe people will listen to the budget, take sound bites and say, yes, we're going and get this, we're going and get this. But Madam Presiding Officer, in preparation for today, I came to the library of the House, which most members don't use, and the goodly ladies in the library of this House supplied me with every single budget presented in this House from the first Chief Secretary, Mr. Hochoy Charles, because those previously were chairmen, from Mr. Charles, and of course I had those for the last 4 years. And so I have every single budget presented from Mr. Charles all the way to now, and the pattern remains the same. And what's interesting is that for the 20 years that the PNM has been in power in Tobago, 15 of those years, the PNM was also in power in Trinidad. And so it's not a UNC thing, it's really a Trinidad versus Tobago thing. That's the reality. In fact, there is a little difference in how we are treated based on budgetary allocation in the last 20 years, although 5 of those 20 years were really managed by a different party in Trinidad. And one would think, if we were to go on the electioneering promises of those opposite, that if we had PNM in Tobago and PNM in Trinidad, that we will get close to the maximum allocated from the Dispute Resolution Commission. I thought that the age-old proverb from Tobago that says if you have a brother in the mango tree, you're going to eat. I thought since they have a brother in the mango tree, that they would have yam. And I thought more so that since the brother in the mango tree was actually born in Tobago, that they would have more than yam. But the pattern has not changed. The pattern has not changed. And I am not the only person that recognized that. I saw a news clipping with the Chief Secretary saying that, look, we're not going to get all the money that we asked for. So here is the problem. We asked for $4.7 billion. We can only raise via taxation, and I'll speak to that in a short while, via taxation, 198 million, somewhere around there. We will be allowed to borrow, as we have been told for quite some time now, you will be allowed to borrow. And we expect to perhaps get half of what we asked for from the central government. The truth is, we have no clear path to financing the budget that was presented. And that's the first error in the budget that was presented. There is no clear path to getting $4.7 billion for Tobago's needs. And if the Secretary of Finance is saying that $4.7 billion is what we need to advance Tobago's progress, to advance Tobago's development, then the Secretary of Finance should have come to the public with more than just saying we want $4.7 billion, we will get $198 million in taxes, and we're going to be able to borrow at some point in the future. That doesn't sound like reasoned planning. That doesn't sound like good planning. And so when I said that hopefully this is the Secretary's last budget, I was serious. Because I think if the political leader of the PNM is to get up here later today and announce to Tobagonians that the Secretary of Finance will no longer be the Secretary of Finance, I think we will exit this house to a carnival outside. And the only reason I would tell her not to do that is because now it's COVID and we don't want people jam up outside in a celebration. But Tobagonians will celebrate, because for the last 8 years, we have more or less gotten the same recipe. This is a textbook definition for insanity. This is a textbook definition for a Sintan's case. Doing the same thing the same way over and over and over again and expecting a different result. And that's why I have said, fool me once, shame on you. But fool me 20 years and I stupid, a real stupid. Now, if we go by the evidence provided by the Secretary of Finance himself, that between 2012 and 2018, we could see that the economy of Tobago virtually collapsed. In 2011-2012, data published by the CSO put the Tobago economy at more than 2 billion. And in the Secretary's budget of 2017 and 2018, he confirmed that the output in 2016 was 1.85 billion. This year, he cleaned up last year's figures and confirmed that Tobago produced 1.7 billion of output in 2017 and 1.74 billion of output in 2018. So, what do all these figures say about the Tobago economy? Well, simply put, in 2018, the Tobago economy was about 6% smaller than in 2016 and about 12.5% smaller than in 2012. This, Madam Presiding Officer, is a virtual collapse of the economy. The numbers don't lie. And we have to be reminded that the CDP2 plan should have materialized under the tenureship, under the 8-year tenureship of the Secretary of Finance. What has become of those outcomes in the CDP2? Why weren't we able to fulfill those lavish plans in the CDP2? And some of those plans were great plans. Furthermore, the crash in our economy and the mismanagement of our economy has also virtually destroyed the tourism sector. And let's be honest, yes, the world suffered from a global economic downturn. But guess what? The rest of the Caribbean region, prior to COVID-19, all came back strong. They all bounced back in terms of tourism and tourist arrivals. What happened to us? Dog bite me? Why we so bad lucky? Why we can't get people through our doors? And I know the members will say, well, it's because we don't have a Sanders, and I will address that a little later on. Because they will try to make Tobagonians feel that Sanders was a panacea for everything. When we look at the developmental plans of the Secretary of Finance, and I look through the budget statement and I look at the estimates, the Secretary of Finance development program over the years seemed to be centered mainly on URP, road resurfacing, CPEP, market repairs, slipper drains and other minor projects, as well as housing resettlement projects. And we know those housing resettlement projects are just to line the pockets of cronies. And now, he intends to complement all of this with an ill-defined Tobago homecoming, which is unsupported by any well-defined festival agenda, any regulated tourism industry, and we brought a motion on that. In fact, I piloted a motion in this House on regulating the tourism industry. And we haven't explored properly digital marketing, online presence. We haven't properly looked at reshaping THTI and what they do up at THTI. And so it's like a hodgepodge of ideas. And I could now understand why so much is promised and so little ever materializes. Because when we do development planning in this way, it will not result in any results. Look through the books. I looked through all the books. You know how many projects we had? Some of those projects I was shocked were on the books. Things that I thought were novel in my brain were already placed and proposed to Tobagonians and never happened. And never happened despite the fact that 15 of their 20 years, they had a brother in the mango tree in Trinidad. Never happened. Never happened. And those that happened donkey years after. And so the administrative complex in Roxburgh, for example, proposed since about 2005. Since about 2005. What happened to the Bayleaf project? What happened to that? That we were budgeting for at the start. What happened to all of these grand ideas that were supposed to pivot Tobago and put Tobago on the map? What happened to them? Why have we not been able to accomplish the hard, difficult, big budget things? Why? But yes, part of the reason is insufficient funding from Trinidad. But certainly, if you spend the first 4 years and you say I wasn't getting enough money, you're going to spend a second, third, and fourth year using the same strategy. You wouldn't sit down and say, well, let's see how Tobago can earn a revenue that can fulfill its budget demands. I want to not spend significant time critiquing the budget because that might bring on a headache. But I want to look at some critical areas. If we look at growth and development targeting, one of the striking indications of the Secretary's lack of planning capacity is that he ignores the fact that his own data suggests the need to specify a targeted rate of growth of the Tobago economy as it seeks to rise from the ashes created by his predecessor, who happened to belong to his own party. And given the damage done now, combined with the COVID-19 pandemic this year, I think there are two pieces of information we should have gotten in the budget. First, I think we should have gotten a projected rate of growth for the Tobago economy up to at least 2022. At least 2022. Which will show us that we're not planning in a myopic way, but we're planning for a longer term. And related to this, we also need to know the required growth rate relative to the cost of borrowing, taking into account the fact that much of the financing by either the THA or the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago will come from borrowing. And so, yes, being able to borrow is good, but we needed to have that projected growth rate up to at least 2022 so we know how much we need to borrow, how quickly we need to borrow it, how we need to spend it, and that will more or less inform the actualization of the budget. On the matter of projected growth, the Minister of Finance in his midterm review projected that the national economy will be growing by 4.7% by the year 2021. Is the Secretary projecting the same growth rate for Tobago? Because I would think that since Tobago is behind Trinidad in its developmental trajectory, what should happen is that we should be looking at a growth rate for Tobago of at least 6%. We need to grow at a faster rate than the national economy in order for us to catch up, in order for us to undo some of the damage that has already been done. And when we look at the Minister of Finance in Trinidad and what he projected at the last supplemental budget hearing, I think that the Minister in Trinidad is being pretty brave, almost adventurous, because he is doing his projection on oil at $45 per barrel, WTI, West Texas Intermediate, and 2.90 per MMBTU. I think those are ambitious figures. Notwithstanding, we needed to hear from the Secretary of Finance what the projected growth rate for the Tobago economy should be by 2022, and that growth rate had to be projected based on where we are in our developmental thrust at this time. On the matter of accountability and transparency, And this is a vexing area, Madam Presiding Officer, because every single Auditor General report that we have had of the THA within the last 2 decades gave us adverse opinions from the Auditor General. We can't be coming to Tobago at our 20th budget, at your 20th budget. Let me say we, because I'm not part of that. At your 20th budget, and now talking about putting systems in place. Yet when I go back to the first budget presented in this House in January of 2001 by the then Chief Secretary, Mr. Orville London, in that budget, he was talking the same language, putting systems in place so that we can be properly audited. Fast track, 20 years later, and what? We're at the same place. And then to come now and gloss over accountability as if it's just an accounting issue as opposed to a transparency issue is vexing, because it's more than just an accounting issue. It's a transparency issue. And this is critical to ensuring that people trust the government. If you're not transparent with people, they can't trust you. They can't trust you. And so, to come and tell us in your twilight hours in governance, because it is twilight, as the sun is setting on your 20 years, that you're now looking to put systems in place for accountability, is a slap in the face to Tobagonians. Is a big box down to Tobagonians. And we're not taking that. That is unacceptable. When we go to plans and projections, I want to start by looking at education and Tobago's development. I want to start there. Now, the Secretary's budget statement did give some evidence that there was a desire to make some meaningful inputs into education. I like to be fair. The Secretary's budget did give some of that. However, what was given is not enough. Because when we look, for example, at the $3 million to support TVET, that is wholly inadequate. And when we look at the fact that education has to operate outside of school repairs and maintenance of schools and training of school supervisors, to include the upgrade of e-learning initiatives to be the new standard. And also when we look at what we need to do for special needs students, then we have not nearly begun to scratch the surface in terms of what we need to do for education. Education has to be priority number one. If we have to transform the economy of Tobago, then we have to make education our top priority. So $3 million to support TVET is not enough. Because for us on this side, we believe that when it comes to vocational education, we do not have sufficient, meaning enough, spaces and centers and programs to train our young people when it comes to vocational education. Our system is still largely based on a hackneyed model of education that supports traditional academia, but does not equally support vocational studies. And if this island is to grow, then we better be producing a lot more engineers and technical citizens who are more technical, who are gifted with their hands. Now, many Tobagonians will agree with us that we must upgrade all our schools, including special needs schools, from preschool all the way up to tertiary, and they must match global standards. And if we are talking about ICT injection, we on the minority side, we are proposing that we have to have technology in our schools, from the simplest things like those student badges that our students go to school with. Our students must have student badges that have barcode readers on them, that when they pass through the gate, they are automatically checked into school. Teachers are automatically checked in. Teachers are checked into classrooms. And I went to a school in Trinidad, Madam Presiding Officer, and I was amazed that right there in Trinidad, we have such integrated and technologically advanced school plans that teachers didn't need to go and ask and call students by name to check if they're present. The roll is automatically generated by virtue of their student badges. And so if we are not thinking about moving in that direction, then COVID should have convinced us that we should have already been there. Because we see the challenges that we face during COVID with online teaching. Teachers don't know how to use Zoom properly. Teachers can't manage students with porn on Zoom and don't know how to kick them out of the Zoom classroom. And that speaks to where we are when it comes to upgrading our schools and making them technologically advanced. Tobago's education system, secondly, is badly unbalanced. And I spoke about that a little while ago. It's badly unbalanced when we look at the proportion which we fund traditional academics to other things like music, entertainment, the creative arts, sports, engineering professions, fashion, and agriculture. We need to do more. The farm school at Kendall, for example, need to do more, and it can't be a farm school for young people who don't look like they pass any other subject. It had to be a farm school for people who are serious about agriculture. Agriculture is not for those who we deem as failure from the traditional system. Agriculture, if we want to be serious about food security, has to be about encouraging our young people to sign up, including the brightest among our young people. We need to also have a well-funded parental support system or program, and that must be aimed at addressing the damaging effects of disguised poverty and the psychological challenges of inherited mental slavery. And so we need to begin to have a program for our parents that has to be budgeted for, because many of our parents are ill-equipped. Many of our parents are not equipped enough to treat with the needs of their children. We see it. You know what many parents think their role is? Many parents on this island think their role is to buy a new JanSport, buy the latest sneakers at the most expensive price, ensure the clothes is well pressed, and send them off to school. But that is really nothing when it comes to treating with the support our children need from parents. Talk to the teachers and they will tell you that parental support is one of their largest challenges. So where are our programs for the parents? Where are our parenting programs? And many parents on this island seem to think that their roles end when the child leaves primary school. So they're right there up until orientation. First they are high school. After that, you don't see them again. They know where wrong. You have to call, you have to beg. Sometimes as a teacher, you have to jump in a vehicle, catch car, go home by them, try to pull out children, beg for SBA here or there, beg them to do the homework, calling the parents. When the parents come, the parents vex more than you because you're wasting their time and they take them away from work to come. We have people who taught in this house, so they know the drill and the drama when it comes to parents on this island. And so critical to treating with education on this island is the need for us to have a parental program that is very extensive. We need a more extensive parental program. They have to become part of it. And one suggestion might be for us to have daddy and me or mommy and me classes. When children are going to extra classes, some of these classes must require that parents come and sit down with the children too and learn the same work that the children are learning. There's nothing wrong with that. And when we talk in education, there's also an opportunity for us to also look at foreign direct investment in education. And my colleagues will elaborate more on this, but a motion was brought to this House by Councillor Dr. Faith Beeswell that spoke to that. How do we use FDIs within the education system, especially with tertiary education? Why do we insist on trying to do it alone when we could draw on the assistance of well-established institutions globally and bring them to our shores and use them? Imagine if we have a facility here that can attract about 5,000 students from outside of Tobago. I mean, we don't need a facility as big as UWI that might have 20,000 students. We could just have an institution of 5,000 students, and you will see how that will do wonders for our economy, how that will cause college towns to pop up, how that will cause other services and innovation to happen, how that will lead to foreign exchange and foreign currency within the system. 5,000 outsiders. That should be our benchmark. We don't need more than that. And so we have to look critically at how foreign direct investment can be a part of the education plan and program of development that we have. When we talk in education, we need to also talk to the issue of the teachers on contract. Many of our teachers are unhappy. And I note that the Chief Secretary has given a commitment that contracts will now be a minimum of 3 years, and that will be standard. So we have gone back to what it was pre-PNM time, which is good. We should have gone back there a long time ago. But when it comes to our teachers on contract, and I want to spend some time on this, because people like to badmouth teachers and think all teachers do a march for more money and want more money. I taught at Speyside High School. The establishment, meaning the public service positions at the high school for English language teachers, were two. This is a school with a population of about 500 students. This is a school that has a sixth form program. But based on the establishment of the school, which was done under the old SEMP program, we're entitled to 2 English teachers. Now, in theory, your teachers on contract are really filling a temporary void. But how can the other teachers within that English department, of which I was a part of, be temporary when you need them? You need them. And so that disparity happens not just at Speyside High, but at practically all our secondary schools on the island. And I mean, this speaks to why we need to become more autonomous, because we could have fixed that with a stroke of the pen from the executive. But what is required is that we do manpower audit. And during my 7 years as a teacher, almost every year they're doing a manpower audit. Almost every year they come in to ask me to update this file with my qualifications. Almost every year they come in and check to see what we have and what we need. And every year it has gone no further than that, which means that what was required is that we needed to make a request through the cabinet for the increase in positions, for the establishment to change and to reflect what we have now. And so when contract teachers have to go to court and sue for gratuity money, come on. And the reality is that we have teachers on contract who are being paid less, because every contract teacher is paid less than the counterparts who are in the establishment for doing the same work. So I taught lower 6, upper 6, fourth formers, and I got paid less than teachers within my department who taught less children than I taught, just because I'm on contract. And while some may argue it's not about the money, it's about the love for the profession, at some point in the day, after you burn out yourself marking papers and teaching late into the evening, you have to go home and you have to look at your private budget and decide whether you could afford things or not afford things. And so teachers on contract should not be treated so differently from those in the establishment, especially when they're doing the same work. And the standard across the public service usually is that those on contract are paid a little higher than those within the establishment by virtue of the fact that those on contract does not have the security of tenure that those in the establishment has. That doesn't happen in the teaching service in Tobago at all. And this has to be fixed. And if it's not fixed by January next year, you can be guaranteed that I will fix it. Staying with education, and I see that we have finally some noise about giving Scarborough Secondary School a new school. Well, that is long overdue. And if my memory serves me right, when the PNM took office, I remember the former Chief Secretary commissioning that a road be built behind Shaw Park, that road that went away in the sea. And he publicly said, well, this road will fix the problem. It will happen on budget. It will happen before time. That Chief Secretary gone, and the road gone too. And Scarborough Sec soon will go. And so for everybody, we are elated that, yes, Scarborough Sec is on the agenda. But when we look at the estimate for reconstruction of Scarborough Secondary, all we have in the estimate is $50 million, which means that all we budget for is a sod-turning ceremony. Because that $50 million, based on the explanatory note, is for acquiring the land, doing geotechnical surveys, architectural designs, and so on, and consultancy, and so on. So how did the secretary arrive at $200 million when we now budgeting for geotechnical surveys, when we now budgeting for acquisition of the land, when we now budgeting for architectural design? How we arrive at $200 million? And that is why we just end up in problems. That is why in 2016, in the budget statement, it was said that Scarborough RC will cost $15 million, and by the time Scarborough RC done, it costs near to $100 million. Scarborough RC was budgeted at $15 million, but by the time it finished, it was 80-something million thereabout, and then we had to pay an next million or so to fix tiles. And that speaks to poor budgeting. Because I don't understand how in 2016, we could have budgeted for Scarborough RC at $15 million, based on the budget statement read by the Secretary of Finance then. And guess what? It's the same Secretary of Finance now. And by the time it's done, it was closer to $100 million. Look at the percentage of increase. And we may very well be throwing away money and wasting money based on how we plan and how we project things. And so we have to do better for Scarborough Secondary. In fact, in my first budget response in this house, I spoke to this issue of Scarborough Secondary. Roll back the tapes and you will see. So it's not the first time I'm talking about it, because I have done many things with that school. And trust me, it is scary, the thought that we could be here one day and hear that our school and children slip away. And those who are geologists will know what coralline limestone does, what the soil type in the area can result in. And when we look at the effects of anthropogenic features along the coastline from Scarborough and what is happening in terms of wave action and energy, Scarborough Sec is in danger. And so if it took you 20 years to realize the urgency of this, then perhaps better late than never. But if all you estimate to spend in this fiscal cycle is $50 million, then it means that in this fiscal year, 2021, all we will get is a turning ceremony. When we look at healthcare in Tobago, I want to move on to healthcare and Tobago's development. I think COVID-19 exposed the soft underbelly of Tobago's dependence on Trinidad. It exposed it. And remember that motion we brought last that spoke about us being unable to think laterally or to think creatively on our own, and that all we could merely do is come press conference after press conference and regurgitate what we heard from the national press conference. It only showed up how dependent we are on Trinidad. And all this big talk about fifth schedule and who have responsibility and protocol and who in charge of what, all that big talk and mean nothing. And mean nothing. Because when the rubber hits the road, we have no power. None. And not just we have no power, but we seem to have no creative thinking as well. When we look at healthcare and Tobago's development, we need to start looking at healthcare also from a tourism perspective. I mean, that means that we have to fix healthcare for the locals first. But we can look at tourism from healthcare from a tourism perspective. And I spoke about this last budget. And the Secretary of Finance assured me that these are considerations of his team. Things like palliative care. Why aren't the people who are terminally ill and know they're going and die, why aren't we attracting them to come to Tobago to spend their last days in the finest facility, in the best natural environment in the world? Why aren't celebrities who are overdosing on drugs not flying in here and saying, I want to be rehabilitated in a place like Tobago? Because Tobagoans are friendly. Tobagoans just mind their business, at least some way. And they wouldn't really be putting me up on Facebook every minute, and I'll get to, in peace, be rehabilitated. Why aren't we thinking as broad as that? Are we still thinking about tourism in terms of sun and sand and sea? That is old school tourism. The rest of the Caribbean has already captured that market. And so we should be thinking seriously about how do we diversify our tourism product offering. And healthcare is one of those things. We also have to look at revisiting community health. And health centers in the villages really irk me. Because I think we're not even using them to the fullest potential. If the old lady or the old man in the village only using the health center to go and test vitals once a month, you go by the health center for Doctor Day, as they call it up in the country, and you test your vitals, you perhaps get some prescription for medication, or you get some medication from the pharmacist, then we are grossly underutilizing our healthcare facilities. It makes no sense to boast about having the most health centers per capita. But at the same time, we can also boast about having year-on-year increases in the number of people having to be treated for communicable diseases. That is a sign of failure. It's a sign that the system not working. That's nothing to be proud of. If this year we had 500 new diabetic patients, but next year we have 1,000, that ain't nothing to boast about. That is not a sign that the healthcare system working. It's a sign that it's not working efficiently. And so those community health centers has to become central to community health education. Health centers in the community must be places that people can go and get cooking demonstrations, how to cook healthier foods, and get vegan recipes, and learn how to make healthier bread and cakes and so on. The health center in the village must be the place that the seniors can go and do some aerobics workout and do some exercise in the yard of the health center. We have to begin to transform health centers from being a place for just a doctor day when the month comes to being a place where people can be treated holistically. And why is it we don't have psychologists and social workers working in every village health center? Let's suppose the chief secretary get a horn. He should be able to just walk to the health center, Madam Chief Secretary, right in the village and talk to somebody instead of looking to beat up your wife. Just saying. And so that kind of support system has to be far and wide. So the same way we have Doctor Day at the health center, you must have mental health days at the health center too. Because health centers have to become places for more than just seeing the doctor to test your vitals. And we have to use these health centers in the villages to do mass health education. So we could change the way we just cook for even harvest. Where everybody think they must cook with all the fat in the world. And make all the unhealthy stews. We have to teach people. That's the only way we'll be successful at health care. Otherwise, we'll be spending more and more money every single year on health care. Because we'll have more and more sick people. We want to move from health to community housing, stock, and tourism. And housing is another area where we have failed and failed miserably. Imagine, Madam Presiding Officer, we had a project to offer lands in Belgarden some time long ago. Millions upon millions were spent, and all now the lands can be distributed. The minority leaders asked in this house many times, how many houses have you built in the last year? In the last 4 years, how many houses have you built in the last 4 years? And if you're not going to build houses, how many parcels of land have you given out in the last 4 years? How many? This is one of the areas we have dropped the ball. And there is a housing crisis in Tobago. Many of our young professionals cannot afford a home. And people who are young professionals in their 20s and early 30s must be in a position to go to the bank and get a mortgage to afford a home. But the truth is they cannot compete on the market. They cannot compete on the open market. They can't compete with rich Trinidadians who could purchase a townhouse where you have shared walls for 1.8 million. They can't compete with that. They can't compete with the foreigner who could buy a lot of land in Mount Turvin for in excess of $1 million. They cannot compete with that. And I'm sure if we do the cost differentials, it will prove that the cost of land and housing in Tobago is significantly more than any other district in Trinidad and Tobago. That's the sad reality. And sometime under the former Secretary of Finance, because not only have we had a crisis in terms of housing and how much houses we can produce for public consumption or parts of land we can produce, but we have a problem getting young professionals into the game. And the former Secretary of Finance, the immediate former Secretary of Finance, had a program, a young home owners savings program with FCB Bank, First Citizens Bank. And many of the young people who we all encouraged to participate in that program have been left wondering, but what is this about? Because that savings scheme has no special interest attached to it. So you might as well save your money on their mattress. It has no unique special interest to it. And then when you save in this scheme, one of the things we said earlier on is you have to give some priority to young homeowners. If it is we are going to say 5% of every estate that we're going to distribute either as land or homes will go to people within this savings scheme. It has to be pegged like that so that we can begin to chip away at the wider market, at the public market. The THA has to do something to force the market prices of homes and land in Tobago down. We have to do something about it. And the way to do that is by having serious and significant public injection into our housing and land program. I also want to propose today that there is a potential for our housing stock to also be linked to tourism. And yes, we are looking at, and I'm hearing all this talk about having 10,000 or however much A-class rooms on the island. That is good. And I think that should be done from the private sector. I think the state should encourage the private sector to do that, and I'll talk about that in a while. But global trends suggest that people are looking for homestays. That is why Airbnb is on the rise and hotels are declining in comparison to the Airbnbs. Because people want to go and stay in a nice room, yes, but stay in a house and feel as if they are part of a community. People are doing it all over the world. In fact, it's why the Castor model is so successful. They have been doing it before Airbnb come into place. And so one of the things that I wish to propose is that when we are building public homes, is that we build them in such a way that they will have income potential. That these same homes that we are building will have the potential to be rented as Airbnbs. And we have to be deliberate about it. We have to be deliberate about how we do it. So that even young professionals who wouldn't ordinarily be able to afford a home, the bank can look at this house and say, well, this house has an income potential of X amount, and so you could now afford the mortgage that you could not afford before because this room or this part of the house can now help you pay down your mortgage. So there's an opportunity, even as we are doing public housing, to integrate it into the tourism room stock by way of purpose building these homes to facilitate Airbnbs. Which means that instead of always doing these generic housing communities where we find this large estate and just build a whole community of perhaps 50 homes or however much homes, it might make sense to even spread some of these homes across villages on the island. So instead of building 50 homes in one space, build 50 homes across the island in different villages. And in so doing, you're expanding villages. You are offering tourists a serious village and community life while they come here. And we are sure that we have excellent room stock when it comes to Airbnb or bed and breakfast. And it's important that we also look at village expansion in that way too. Because for those of us in Tobago East, we will know that we experience a lot of urban push or pull towards the Tobago western side of the island. And so it's another way of keeping young professionals in the villages. When you look at a village like Delaford, where a significant portion of the young professionals, they all move out. They all move out. And when they move out in significant numbers, the few who remain are straddled with the burden of having to tote the community on their backs. And what we want is that when our young people go off and study and return, when they get all this brightness and education and skills and profession, We want them to live in the community they were raised in for the most part, so that they can in turn contribute to that community and build up the community. And that's a segue to talking about community participation in the governance development process. Because we have to begin to trust villages with their development. And I must commend the member for Scarborough Collar Hall. On Tuesday, the village council invited me to a meeting. They called me and they told me they're having a meeting to discuss a new community center. I went to the meeting, not realizing that it was a meeting being called by the Division of Community Development. But in the meeting, I was heartened by the secretary's interaction with the villagers and the assurance to the villagers that, look, you are the chief investors in this. And before the design is even done up, you will meet with the architects and the engineers and tell them what you want, and they will design it based on that. And the village council president was saying to the secretary, when this is finished, we want a MOU signed in terms of the management operation for this center. Because we as a village council, we are managing the old shed that we have now for a center. We pay the bills, we do everything in that place. We don't want you to come and build a new building and take it away from us completely. We want a partnership with the government. And that is how community development is supposed to happen. And I was heartened by that conversation because in my mind, if we are to develop villages, it has to happen from the ground up. We have to empower villages to do the work that needs to be done. Village councils have to be reformed so that village councils are not extension of party groups, but village councils are meaningful. We have to hold village councils to account, and we can't have situations as is happening in several areas where a few people have a lasso around the neck of the whole village and don't want to give up the people village council. And when they try to change bank accounts, you go to the bank and tell them you ain't give up power yet, and the bank can't open a new account, the bank can't transfer signatories because it's all kind of bacchanal, and one side have to go for lawyer for the next side and all kind of story. And I'm talking it because I'm talking my own business too. That is happening even at Speyside where I live. And that cannot be the ambition for village development. We have to have greater cohesion. Once upon a time, we had that in Tobago. Once upon a time, village councils meant something. When I sit and I talk with the oldest resident in Speyside, a man by the name of Eric Davis, 101 years old, he would tell me about the times he was the leader of the village council. When Mr. La, who owned Bird of Paradise Inn, where the water wheel is, and owned all those lands into the housing scheme that was acquired by the state, he would tell me stories of the village council getting up and breaking down the barbed wire fence that blocked off the beach all behind Gemma's Day. The village council did that so that villagers could have access. He would tell me stories of works department coming to the village council to make decisions about massive drainage in the area, and the village council will be the ones to lead the team from works and show them the area. That's village council job. I remember when Speyside High School was being built, the same village council and the seniors went to the planners and said, look, if you build a school down there in the plain, in the swamp, it got flooded. This is how this area is operate. Guess what they do? They ignore it. And the school has flooded several times. And that is what happens when we remove governance from the local, from the micro level, and hoard all of governance at this place called the THA. We are not the repository of all things knowledge and all things wise and all things good. We have to engage communities. And so that is why I must commend the Secretary for Community Development on how she handled that meeting and the assurances that she gave to the villagers on Tuesday. So we have to begin to rethink community development. We have also, Madam Presiding Officer, some outstanding projects, such as the transportation hub, first raised in 2003. We're in 2020. Somebody told me recently that the area where the fuel tanks were in Scarborough is being cleared for transportation hub. I don't know much about that. That looks like a crazy place to put one. But we need a transportation hub. And this is one of the areas where I am also begging for myself as a user of public transport. Because we cannot in 2020 have a public transportation system operating at an ad hoc manner. Sometimes you're down by the bus shed by Gardenside Street, and you know the bus is scheduled to pass at this time, and you stand up there waiting like a fool for the bus, only to call PTSC, and somebody say, well, the bus ain't traveling today. No notice, no nothing. We brought new buses on the island. There was a whole hullabaloo about it. We cut ribbon. We took the buses, drive up to Lansome, drive to Chavez, look nice in the buses, take out selfie, do everything. And we are at a point now where we have to use small maxis to run the route between Scarborough and Chavez and Scarborough and Lansome. Small maxis, private maxis. When we were told that these public buses would have managed the route. And in fact, before this second set of buses came, one of the first things I did as representative for Palataville Lansome Speyside was to go down to PTSC for the commissioning of 2 ROSA buses. We were told then, look, these are the types of buses we will use to go all the way up to the countryside because the larger buses won't work. By the time new buses come, we get the larger new buses and they seem to be problematic in the area. Poor planning. Poor planning. And in fact, it means that people don't have a say. Other outstanding projects include simple things like a jetty. I remember listening to a joint select committee of Parliament, I think it was Public Accounts Committee, and the former chief administrator saying to the Public Accounts Committee that we build a new jetty in Little Tobago, and having to go out Little Tobago the day after to see if really I was living someplace else. All now. And many in this house wouldn't know that we have had reef boat operators that had to draw on their insurance to pay visitors to the island and pay them off to be quiet because they slip on a jetty that is in the water, halfway in the water. Simple projects, infrastructural projects that are supposed to assist with our tourism thrust must be done. Customs and immigration services for yachties in Charlottesville. Another issue, something that was raised from as early as about 2002. The state, meaning the THA, purchased a house that is supposed to be used for customs and immigration services, a house next to the library. They're still not in it yet. They still caught up somewhere in the health center in Charlottesville. And here the hilarious part of it, when the yachties come ashore, they have to randomly ask people where customs and excises. Sometimes they could come ashore, walk around, and no customs person interact with them yet. Just come ashore on their own and walk up and down. Because there's no signage nowhere about saying this direction to custom and excise. None. Simple things we can't get done. When we talk about food production for a little bit, and I want to say I'm happy that those in the executive have seen it fit to follow our lead. When you follow our lead, good things does happen. So we give out ceilings. We still try to find some ceilings to give out. We visit farms and promote them. We still visiting farms in white boots to promote them too. Welcome on board. If it's a good thing, all we could do it. We don't have a copyright on good things. We are not selfish about good things. In fact, the more of us do the good things, is the more good things that will get done. And so let me commend the executive for doing that and for following our lead. And I'm seeing this new inspiration and widespread cry for greater food productivity or production and for food security and sovereignty. I even listened to the Prime Minister and some farmers the following day who disputed what the Prime Minister said. But agriculture really only contributes about 0.5 percentage point of the national GDP. And so nationally, we have a problem. And I would think, and I would have hoped that by now, we would have had meaningful research that would say to us, Tobagonians, exactly how much food we import from neighboring Trinidad or elsewhere versus how much food we produce ourselves. But that kind of research can't be done when we mash up PRDI and when we underfunding planning. Where is that research that is supposed to now direct our attention as to where we ought to go in terms of food production and food security? I want to commend the Secretary with responsibility for URP, because I like to be fair. We have finally, after so many years, we have started seeing URP being a lot more productive than they were previously. And they are productive in the agriculture sector as well. They are preparing the seedlings, they are growing food, and they are selling food. Kudos for that. That is commendable. And that might be a step in the right direction. That might be a step in terms of weaning some of these workers in URP and weaning them onto their own farms and into their own food production initiatives. But we have to decide as an island what is our competitive advantage in terms of food. What can we do in agriculture best or better than the rest of the world? Because if we are honest, most things that we grow here, most things that we farm here, somebody somewhere else in the world can produce it far quicker, at a far cheaper price, and it might be cheaper to import it than grow it ourselves. Now, the basis of food security is not so much to compete with the world, but it's to ensure that you have a secure supply of food. That if anything should happen to the world, we won't starve. And so, yes, we need people to grow food for the purpose of food security. But what is that product that we can grow here in Tobago that we can provide to the rest of the world better than anybody else? Is it cocoa? Is it Benebol? Because that's food processing. Is it Benebol and red mango and tulum and tamban balls? What is it that we could produce from an agriculture perspective that puts us above and beyond the world, that we can sell to the world? What happened to the hot pepper project from out in Roxborough? What happened to that? We had a hot pepper project about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. What happened to that? And you're noticing the same pattern. Tobagonians are noticing the same pattern. What happened to that hot pepper project? What became of that project? How does forestry and environmental management fit into all of this? Because a lot of the farms seem to be on the outskirts of the main ridge, on the perimeters of the main ridge. So what role does forestry and environmental management has to play in all of this? And so it's not enough to just come and say to us, well, we're going to build access roads. I hope when the Secretary of Agriculture speaks, he will tell us how these access roads will quantify for us in real numbers how these access roads resulted in greater agriculture production. Quantify it in terms of numbers. And if by now we can't quantify that in terms of numbers, it means no research was done, and it means we're just vupsing. We're just building roads everywhere. Like the road to nowhere going up in the back of James Street. Just building roads. In 2008, Madam Presiding Officer, Dr. Anselm London said in his budget presentation, and I'm quoting now, he said, as we move to expand the development momentum, the Assembly must also, as a matter of urgency, revisit its relationship with the Airport Authority of Trinidad and Tobago and the Port Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. It is so unreasonable to think that greater responsibility for managing the Port of Scarborough or the Crown Point Airport should not dissolve to the Tobago House of Assembly. Notice a move from agriculture to port management. You notice in the pattern, Madam Presiding Officer? We're saying one thing now and conveniently changing with tongue at another time. And if this was the feeling of the PNM in 2008, how did we get to the place where central government could come up and call first meeting with residents on airport without THA? How? How? When the fifth schedule has A and C ports listed in it, how? You see, I realized that this executive council, this PNM run THA, only had mouth for 5 years. The mouth only existed for 5 years. But when is the own brother chucking out the eye, they have nothing to say. Can't say pip, can't say nothing. When the own brother breaching all of the THA Act, when the own brother could just decide to put sandals and decide we put in sandals in Tobago after aligning with Butch Stewart, not even consultation with the chief sec, but after aligning with Butch Stewart, could give that commitment. And we say nothing. It speaks to our politics of convenience on this island. It's a politics of convenience. And so if agriculture is to do well, then we also have to manage our air and sea ports. We have to play a more integral role in that. Do we have a port as yet that gives us the capability to do international exports from here? And the answer is no. You know how many budgets ago we're talking about that? You know how long 2008 was? And we are in 2020, and it's still not being done. For us as an island, Madam Presiding Officer, we have to become more innovative. Innovation has to be a central theme in any and every budget. The Secretary's budget statement makes only a passing reference to unkept promises to support innovation. We are treated to the excuse for failure to undertake a program of digital transformation, a record of failure after 3 years. The Secretary mismanaged rather the efforts to establish a data center at Cove. Where is that? So his RFPs and tenders must be done over because the feasibility studies were badly done in the first place. And I want to remind the Secretary that the bidding process is not intended as a school for the blind. The bidding process has to be open and transparent. For us in the THA, we cannot ask the private sector to become more innovative when we are not innovative ourselves. I am certain I can't just send an e-invoice to any department in the THA and expect it to be honored. Some clerk will call my phone and say, you need to come in and sign this yourself. I have sent letters to the THA and people will call me and say, come in and sign. I said, the thing already signed. No, you have to come in and sign in person. And I'm saying, my God, something as simple as that, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We have to lead the way. During this COVID, we look at what Point 14 was doing. Point 14, a bought corporation with far less resources than the THA was doing. People were getting their social support monies on the phone with a barcode reader, going into the shops around Point 14 and scanning their phone to pay for goods. You know where we at? We still with the card. And then if you need the card to be top up, you have to go back by the division, submit the card, wait a week or two, and then they will call you to come back for a new card. That's where we were. That's where we are at. And so if we have to talk innovation, the THA has to lead the way. And the reality is, most businesses in Tobago do business with the THA. So if the THA leads the way, most businesses on the island will come on board. To help our private sector, what the THA must do is introduce programs to increase the private sector's access to the following key types of resources. One, personnel and skill. And that has to be scientists, technicians, engineers, management, branding and marketing specialists. Two, financial capacity, which is the availability of internal and external finance to meet the cost of innovation. Information. Three, access to information on technology and markets. Infrastructure. Four, supportive physical infrastructure, including laboratories and public experimental and research facilities. Five, favorable market characteristics, which is the freedom to solve problems signaled by the market, absence of protectionist measures, absence of dominance and monopoly, availability of demand. And six, we have to help the private sector also through government policy, which is access to opportunity to shape policies and schemes regarding all of the 5 things I just listed. Those must be the pillars upon which we create a more innovative society. We on the other side were also dissatisfied with the Secretary's offering on foreign direct investment. In our minds, the THA has wasted 20 years trying to set up an unviable industrial park for light manufacturing at Cove. It seems to have finally admitted that loose and uninformed talk about supporting incubator down there will get Tobago nowhere. And not one foreign investor is operating at Cove today. Not a single foreign investor is at Cove. 20 years later, 20 years after it was set up. And I am suspicious, I am cautious about any reliance on Export TT and Invest TT. Because if we are honest, they have not done very well in Trinidad either. Look at their results. Trinidad is still oil dependent. Trinidad has been unable to really push investments and innovation outside of the oil sector, notwithstanding having Export TT and Invest TT. They have well-documented failures. And so I would caution the Secretary in its developmental program to rethink our reliance on Export TT and Invest TT. What we need on this island is to also revisit our arrangement for land ownership by foreigners on the island. And this is a touchy one. I can recall at one time there was a going song on this island, a going complaint that Germans buying out Tobago. I don't know if anybody did the research to show the numbers of Germans actually purchasing lands in Tobago. But the complaint was that foreigners buying out all of Tobago. And that might be partially true. And that might have accounted for the cost of land or the value of land and houses on the island to this day. But perhaps if one look at the data, one will find that the single largest consumer of Tobago lands outside of Tobagonians would be Trinidadians. And there's literally nothing we could do to stop Trinidadians from purchasing piece of land on the island of Tobago. Similarly, there's nothing that can stop Tobagonians from purchasing piece of land in Trinidad. And so I want us to revisit that. We're not revisiting that to make it a carte blanche kind of initiative that you could just come and do what you want. What we have to do is peg land purchases to the desirable outcomes we want for different areas on the island. So for example, when we look at Northeast Tobago into Eastern Tobago, if it is the goal is to secure the environment there, to have a World Heritage Site there, to do the Man and the Biosphere project there, then it means that if we are going to begin to allow foreign direct investments across the board, anywhere on the island, we need to say specifically what kinds of investments are allowed at different parts of the island, as opposed to a carte blanche kind of, no, you can't buy land here, no, you can't buy land there, and if you need to buy land, you need a license, and you have to go through this bureaucratic process to get it. The question is, how many FDIs have we had in tourism? How many foreigners have built a hotel here? And even the Sanders that we wanted, Sanders wasn't going and build it. His we money was going and spend for it. There was no foreign money. Was Trinidad and Tobago had to take money to build that at close to $1 billion. So where are the foreign direct investments? We have not, through policy, encouraged FDIs. And another area that has to be looked at if we have to drive the economy is the area of development banking and creative financing. The irony should not be lost on the people of Tobago that the Secretary of Finance sees it fit to get advice from the Development Bank of Jamaica, but does not see it fit to establish a national development bank with its headquarters in Tobago. That is a proposal that the Chief Secretary can go to the Prime Minister with. I mean, Section 31 of the THA Act requires that they meet frequently. Why can't we in Tobago have a national development bank that funds development projects across the country? And it's interesting because when I go back to Monday, June 25th, 2001, you see, Hansa don't lie. Monday, 25th of June 2001, the then Chief Secretary, this is what he said. He said, I am especially pleased to announce in this house that another PNM election promise is being honored today to establish a Tobago Development Bank facility. Of course, there are many legislative, administrative, financial, and operational issues to treat with, but we must begin now. The time has come to provide the means to allow Tobagonians to access funds at competitive interest rates, to allow them to undertake their own business and other ventures to contribute to the development of Tobago. And the Tobago Development Bank facility will do exactly that. We have the skills both within and outside this assembly to secure the necessary financing and successfully manage such an institution to help Tobagonians. Indeed, I am proud to say that Councillor Dr. Anselm London has been working on a similar project in St. Vincent. As recently as 2 weeks ago, he was meeting with officials of development banks in the Caribbean, and his expertise will contribute richly to this endeavor. We still ain't get the development bank. We have an intermediary sort of arrangement through the business development unit, but we ain't get the development bank. We still do not have a full-fledged development bank. And if we had a development bank then, this was 2001, if we begun setting this up then, by now we may have been able to even have a perishable cash as part of this bank arrangement. by now we could have funded our COVID recovery ourselves through this development bank. And so I want to put it on the table again. And given that in 2001, their own PNM chief said that they love said it and said it was an election promise, although we are going to realize that their election promises never materialize. But a development bank is needed on this island. And we can have a national development bank. Now, if we look and pay close attention to how we are financing even our COVID relief, we'll realize that Trinidad and Tobago as a country has a heavy reliance on development banks to underwrite our development agenda. That's where we have been going for financing. If it was not already clear, the utility of development banking has become well established since the global financial crisis of 2008-2009. And post-COVID-19 financing reinforces it. The World Bank and the regional multilateral development banks such as IDB and EIB have sharply increased their support for countries since then and are coming to the rescue under COVID. Recently, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has taken to highlighting its reliance on the Development Bank of Latin America for large development and emergency loans. CAF was established in 1970 with headquarters in Venezuela. Under Chinese leadership, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has been newly established in 2015 to finance large-scale infrastructure projects that support development in Asia. Many countries have recently moved to address their development financing needs by establishing new national development banks, resulting in more than US $5 trillion of assets under their control, according to one report. On the evidence, versatile development banks are important institutions used by various jurisdictions to promote development, and they can have a big impact. And for the context of Tobago, Tobago's continued dependence on Port of Spain for financial transfers was glaring during the last 3 months under COVID. Glaring. And it makes it worse that we need their money so much that we could allow the central government to break the law and give us our transfers month to month. We allow them to break the law, and the law says it must be quarterly. And it seems like the only benefit the relationship of PNM and Tobago and PNM and Trinidad has is that PNM and Tobago facilitates the encroachment on the THA Act. They facilitate their brothers down there, but when it's in reverse and we need facilitation, is all kind of excuse. And so we have to consider seriously setting up a national development bank right here in Tobago. We have to consider that, to not just fund government projects, but to also buoy the private sector up. Some of the investments needed on this island will be larger than what BDU is offering. And so that development bank has proposed as far as 2001. Since 2001. And they were telling us it is materializing since 2001. And all now within reach. 20 years later, and that election promise never materialized. For us to also manage this economy, we have to put on some big man clothes, and we have to talk to Caribbean Airlines man to man. I saw an announcement recently where Caribbean Airlines is desirous of making milk runs through the Caribbean. And a milk run is when the airline makes several stops en route to its final destination. And these milk runs that Caribbean Airlines is proposing to make is supposed to go through Barbados and Dominica and all over the place, going San Juan, Puerto Rico, all things. And I'm wondering if Caribbean Airlines have a hatred for Tobago. It's only when it comes to Tobago, you just hear them start to talk about the route and making money. But they're doing all sort of other stuff, except advancing the needs and the cause of our sectors here on the island. Yes. Our first line of solution shouldn't be BA or Virgin Atlantic. It should be Caribbean Airlines. That's the national carrier. It should have a responsibility to Tobagonians as it does to Trinidadians. And we always get punished. We are always the one to pay a fine. And they tell us that $50 is because we just abuse the system. But guess what? The system still ain't working properly. And Caribbean Airlines has been operating fraudulently because they have been canceling people's flights and then asking the same people to pay that $50 fine. That is fraud. They have been postponing people's flights. And when people say, well, okay, it doesn't make sense for me to travel again because the flight is now leaving too late, you must pay $50 to fix that. That is wrong. That is robbery in the airway. And so Caribbean Airlines must do right by Tobago. It must do right by Tobago. And all of this speaks to why we need to press on with the issue of self-determination and budgetary allocations. We have to press on. If for nothing else, Tobago will never get a fair chance unless we treat with the issues surrounding our self-determination. Because it's obvious that in these things, Tobago will need the right to make law and to take necessary steps to achieve its own development. And this puts the autonomy at the center of Tobago's needs. It's at the epicenter of our development needs. Moreover, assuming a national revenue collection process undertaken by the Revenue Authority, a significant, predictable source of recurrent and development financing for Tobago would be an upgraded formula in the Constitution, assigning to Tobago a fair share of national budgetary allocations. That needs to go into the Constitution. We note on our side the statement by the Prime Minister that the bill is before the Joint Select Committee and we must wait the process. And it will appear that all we will get is a bill rushed to the House for a vote in the dying days of the House of Parliament, just before the next election. I do not understand all this talk about not having a special majority, because when the current executive in Trinidad started office in 2015, they did not have a special majority. And so going forward, we always knew that no party had a special majority to pass this. And that's why at the last motion, we said to our colleagues on the other side, come, let us together go and talk to both sides. Not to JSC now, not to a Joint Select Committee of Parliament, but talk to leadership on both sides as one team on this matter. Yes. That was rejected. That was rejected by those opposite. And it will appear as if somebody wants to play hanky-panky with Tobago's right to self-determination. But we will keep having these issues if it is, Madam Presiding Officer, we do not address the issue, the burning issue, of our right to self-determination. Under this Executive Council, partnership with Trinidad really means dependence on Trinidad and obedience to the instructions of the Prime Minister. This is mental slavery. And I know that this is what those opposite are afraid of. They are afraid of the potential that they may be in power in Trinidad, but not in power in Tobago. 15 of their last 20 years, they only had mouth between 2010 and 2015. After that, cats stole their tongues. They could not speak. And so this kind of house slavery that we seem to be practicing, seem to be happy practicing, this kind of begging that we happy to do every year must stop. And for that to stop, we have to have serious conversations about revenue generation. For that to stop, we have to have, and we have to press forward with serious conversations about self-determination, about our autonomy, about our right to independently legislate ourselves, and to have an independent economy. We have to get serious about these issues. And it cannot be my party in power in Trinidad, so I will say nothing. It must be, regardless of who is in power in Trinidad, Tobago's issues are first and foremost for Tobago Assemblymen. We have grown weary of the promises that don't materialize. Tobagoans are weary. We know the pattern. We know the drill. Bring a $4-point-something billion budget. Pull out a few nice sounding projects. Bamboozle the people and make them feel like they're going to get done. And 20 years later, they are still not done. It won't work this time. You could fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. I've said in this house already, Madam Presiding Officer, that in 2001, I was a high school student. I could not vote, but I was among the group of young people who felt that Tobago needed a change. I felt at that time that we had a chief secretary that was far too arrogant and did not listen to the people. I felt at that time that too often my teachers had to protest for their salaries because they weren't getting paid on time. They weren't getting their increments. They weren't getting anything. I felt at that time that I was tired of missing classes, not because I was skipping classes, but because the Division of Education then wasn't sending the requisite number of teachers to the school. And so, like many young Tobagonians at that time, we felt, nah, this thing can't continue to work. We need a change. But it has been 20 years. It has been 20 years since. And I've seen promises given in 2001 not materialize until long after I leave university, such as the library and financial complex and cultural complex that we overspent on by gargantuan sums. And I'm wiser now. And I've gotten to understand the intricacies of the thing. And that's why I started preparation by looking at the budget presented by the then Chief Secretary, Mr. Ochoy Charles. And when I saw the budget, I had to ask myself if it's a high school he was planning to run. That had no money. He wasn't even asking for money in the billions yet. Fast track to 2020. And we have had many years of monies rolling in the billions, thanks to the DRC Commission, which was triggered by the then Chief Secretary, Mr. Charles, that he did not benefit from in terms of funding. And yet, even with more funding, we have not realized the majority of our aspirations. We have not. We have not realized them. We have far too many outstanding projects. We have spent 20 years and close to $40 billion. And can we truly say we have had value for money? No, we cannot. But I want to say to this house that Tobagonians are tired of being sold dreams. In fact, I was tired of being sold dreams. That is why I came into politics. In fact, I didn't quite plan to enter politics in 2017. In 2016, that wasn't even on the agenda for 2017. My agenda for 2017 looked more like the need to pack a bag and fly out of Tobago, do some more studies, build a career, and then return. But then when I looked at the children I taught, and that I was encouraging to go to university, and some by that time were graduating university, and coming back to me and said, "Sir, I get a piece of paper you sent me for. What now?" And I had to painfully say to them, "Look, things are real hard in Tobago, you know. You mightn't get through so well in Tobago. I'll advise you to build a career wherever you are. If you want to stay in Trinidad, I can't blame you. If you want to stay in Jamaica, I can't blame you. If you want to go to the US, I can't blame you. We will celebrate your achievements wherever you are in the world because you are still Tobagonian." When I realized that that was the rhetoric I had to share with students, with young people, with bright minds, and I compare that with the number of classmates, my classmates, who are still on the island of Tobago living and working and building this place, I said to myself, we cannot continue generation after generation where all, or rather the majority of our best talents continue to remain outside of Tobago instead of returning to build this place. My sixth form class started in 2001 with 93 students, 93. And if I want to take a roll call of how many of that 93 is on the island, the minority of us are still on this island fighting with this place called Tobago. And it doesn't mean that those who left our shores don't love Tobago. You know, I believe they love Tobago. But the number one reason for the outward migration, for the brain drain, is that our young achievers, our brightest minds feel as if they can't make it here. They feel as if they can't be innovative here. They feel as if they can't get a teacher contract here. Because the cronyism is so rife. And we have secretaries carrying contractors into office in the night time to sign contracts. And we have soul selecting going on for monies in the millions. That has to stop. And we've seen that our living population, the population that lives on the island of Tobago, is almost stagnant. It's not that Tobago people stop make pitney. It's not we stop breed and make pitney. We're still making children. The problem is that the cream of our crop is often looking for opportunities elsewhere. And I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that we expect 100% of our brightest minds to remain in Tobago. Oh no, no society could develop like that. And no society could develop with only its people. Because we need to start to have a discussion about immigration and getting the brightest minds from elsewhere in the world to come here and live and work here. For donkey years, our people have been building other people's country. We could employ the brightest minds from around the world to build here too. That's an economic discussion that we must have. But the reality is we are chasing our own people away by the policies and actions of the last 20 years. We're chasing them away. And so, Madam Presiding Officer, our love for Tobago is unwavering. I believe sincerely all of us in this house loves Tobago. I will hope so at least. I will hope that although we have different ideas and different plans or different processes or different strategies, I will hope that we all love this island called Tobago and love it more than we love ourselves. I will really hope so. And I will hope our love for Tobago will see that we need to do the right things. If I could look through budget after budget after budget after budget and see projects after projects after projects after projects and policy after policy after policy after policy after policy just popping up in budget statements and popping up in estimates and not getting done, it means that we have been doing the same thing, the same way, over and over again, expecting a different result. And Tobagoans are waking up to that reality, that they too have been doing the same thing over and over again. It's unfortunate that any island will give 4 decades to just 2 political parties and not even spell them one in, one out, but give 2 decades consecutively to each. That is a recipe for failure anywhere in the world. That's a recipe for failure anywhere in the world that has a democracy. And so, I presented some broad ideas that I felt were not captured in the budget. I showed the Secretary of Finance the error of his ways. I showed how through his own numbers we have seen decline. And so he cannot boast of his 8 years as being successful. I have shown that Tobago needs to become more innovative. I've shown what we need to do in housing and in tourism. I've shown how we need to engage the private sector and how we need to engage foreign investments. I have shown how we need to prioritize education more than we are doing. I have shown what needs to happen with regards to the parents on this island and us having a more extensive program with the parents. I have shown how we need to recalibrate how community health centers work. Because if the population isn't healthy, we will never see economic success. We'll find ourselves spending all our monies on healthcare. I have shown why self-determination is central to all that we are talking about today. And realizing a $4.7 billion budget. I've shown that we have been presenting these big budgets knowing we're not getting the money, and we have done nothing to get the money. And I have illustrated that Tobagonians are now fed up. It was indicative in the last election. Look at the numbers. The highest voter turnout was in Belgarden, East Roxwood, Delaford, 60%. The second highest voter turnout was Palataville, Lansome, Speyside, 59%. The third highest voter turnout was in Belgarden, Goodwood. That was about 57%. The fourth highest was in Plymouth at about 51%. And then the voter turnout all went below 50%. Even in areas that are supposed to be staunchly in the corner of the opposition, had low voter turnout. Doesn't that say something about how even your own supporters feel about your performance? that even in areas where you could put a couple with a balisé tie on and they will vote for it, the turnout was low. That is a sign of how your own people think about you and the kind of esteem they have of this institution. That is not a healthy sign. The usual thing is that THA elections attract a larger voter turnout than central government elections in Tobago. That is the political history of the island. But that did not happen in 2017. And I'm not even comparing 2017 to 2013, which I think was an abnormally high year. And so we have to do more to engage the people of this island. They are slowly but surely tuning out from this place. And if all you have to offer is rancor, is old talk, ad hominem attacks, cheap shots on the opposition, come to every debate and regardless of the topic for debate, call what's the name and hope that somehow you will score points. If that is all you have to offer, then I have to pray harder for you. And I'll close by saying this. I love Tobago so much that I pray every single day for all of my leaders. And that includes you, Mr. Chief Secretary. That also includes you, political leader of the PNM. That includes you, Minority Leader Duke. It includes the Prime Minister of this country, the opposition leader, and the President, and the head of the judiciary and the police service. And I call all of you by names. And I'm not praying for God to bring you all down, because God doesn't need to bring you all down to uplift me. That's not the business I am in. I'm in a business where we all can be uplifted. And I pray for all of you from a genuine place, because I love this country and I love this island. This island is as much mine as it is yours. And many of you in this house may have options. Many of you in this house may have the financial means that if you want, and if things go sour, you could jump on a plane and fly out. Right now, my US visa needs to be renewed. And with all the bad talkers, bad talk Trump, I don't even know if they are going to get it back. Because the US Embassy checking people's online postings now. And all I've done many good stuff with the US Embassy and have represented the embassy in the US many times. I just bad taught them. Because as far as I'm concerned, the US doesn't have to allow me in the country. No other country has to allow me in the country, because here is where I was born. I was Tobago born, Tobago raised, and when I'm dead, I'll be a Tobago dead. I just have one request. Don't leave me body in tongue. Make sure you bury me up in country in space side. I love this island. And I don't doubt for a minute that you love this island too. But if you really love this island more than you love yourselves, and that's where the tricky part comes in. Not just loving the island, but loving it more than you love yourself. Then you will do better than giving us promises from 2001 that still hasn't materialized till now. You will do better than making statements in 2002 and 2005 and come forward 10 years and saying the opposite of it just because you don't like who in power in Trinidad. You will do better than to flip-flop on policies. Because at the end of the day, when we look at how we are viewed as a separate group of people, as a separate political tribe. And yes, in political science, we use the term tribalism, and it doesn't mean anything negative. We are viewed that way by everybody else, including Trinidadians. And even your PNM counterparts in Trinidad don't see you as their equal. They do not. And if you are honest, you will know that we have seen friends, family, foes from both sides of the divide in Trinidad mistreating Tobago, thinking ill about Tobago. Some think Tobago should never get more money than Chaguanas, or Cuba, or Sando, or Port of Spain. They think they have more people, so why are we getting all this money? They don't understand the cultural nuances. They don't understand the differences. But if you love Tobago more than you love yourself, and more than you love your party, because with some members in this house, is the political party first, before the country, and then the self. They don't even love the self. They love the political party above themselves and above the island of Tobago. If you love this place more than a political party and more than yourselves, then we have to do better than we are doing. We can't come every year with a 4-point-something billion budget, expecting half of that. Don't know where we're getting the rest of the money from. No properly projected growth rate, nothing. Seeing declining economy over the last 5 years or so, when everybody was already bouncing back from the global recession, and then just come and present that casually, lacklusterly, without even a zest, a humph. Tobagoans are watching, and they have grown weary. The last thing we want is for them to give up on this institution called the Tobago House of Assembly. If they give up on this experiment in self-determination, then we could end up losing the entire assembly and reverting to where we were. It will be a sad day if Tobagonians will ever get to that place where they prefer Trinidad colonial rule to their own rule in Tobago. Given the history of this island, given how much we fought against being pit with Trinidad, sorry to use your name, Brother Pitt. Given how much we fought against that, we should never allow this house to get to the place where people stop loving this institution. And for that to happen, Madam Presiding Officer, we need to love Tobago more than just a sign, but we need to love Tobago more than ourselves and more than our political party. Thank you.
Members, it is now 12:28. We break for lunch and return at 1:28.